はい。どうぞご覧ください。
Hey friends, how's your Halloween? Mine was okay. So today I'm making another of my favorite characters. We're making Ulquiorra from Bleach. It was the 20th anniversary of the anime recently, and I want to celebrate too. So we're making my favorite character, which I think was killed off a bit too soon. So if they won't bring him back, I will. So I guess let's go into the void to bring back an Ulquiorra. In case you're wondering, Ulquiorra Cifer, I think that's how you say that, from Bleach, is a calm and serious character with striking green eyes and pale skin. He's one of the most powerful Espada, which is for the bad guys, but yeah, some of them are pretty awesome, so yeah. He even kills Ichigo that one time. That didn't go so well. He is also one of the smartest, as proven by hiding his true power from everyone, even Aizen. Ulquiorra is one of the coolest personalities, as well as one of the most interesting designs. And even though my heart wants to make the final form that is too epic for words to describe, my brain says, you don't have a year to waste on a single costume. So we're doing the simple version now, and I'll convince her to do the other one eventually. I can be so annoying, but back to the costume. Ulquiorra wears a traditional Japanese garment called a hakama, which is pretty much pants, wide-legged pants with some pleats or darts, whichever you want to call it, that give it a flowing appearance, like most other characters in Bleach. Samurai use these to hide the movement of their feet, if I remember correctly, but not a point. On top he wears what I guess is a jacket, that's short in the front and long in the back with some black details, a high collar and long sleeves. The clothes are all white with black details and lining for the jacket, from what I can tell from watching. The hair is also just a textbook anime hair, so not much to say about that either. And we have a half bone helmet that we're probably gonna use magnets to attach to the wig. The shoes kind of look like sandals over socks, but in negative. So we'll make some black shoe covers with some white details. And finally, Murcielago, Ulquiorra's sword, which is a lot lighter than I remember in the anime, which is a lime green hilt and a slightly darker green sheath. The material list is on screen, but I'll say what I'm gonna need pretty much before I need it, so you know. Let's get started. I started by making a mock-up of the jacket, made out of a short jacket's front pattern and the back of a long one, Frankenstein together. I made the adjustments on it and then used it to make the pattern for the real one. The sleeve was also just a pattern I already had, as well as the collar. For the hakama, or the pants, I used the pattern I had and only added the space for the pleats in the middle to make this prototype. Then I added just the elastic as a belt to hold them up so I could try it on. I have 3 pleats, 4 centimeters deep, starting from the middle of each leg. Now to start cutting the real ones. I used an old but very white linen sheet for the pants and a cotton one for the jacket because it's lighter and the jacket is lined. We use the fixed patterns that have been made from the prototype or mock-up, whatever you want to call it, and cut all pieces of the jacket, hakama, and the lining of the jacket. I cut about 1 or 2 centimeters outside of the pattern because I didn't give seam allowance, but you can do that on the pattern if you prefer. Just make sure you have a seam allowance. I also should have ironed the fabric before starting, but my iron's broken, so I couldn't. But you should. It makes a difference. The lining is a cotton lining that I have a lot left over from the Undertaker, so I didn't really spend much on fabrics. Don't forget you will need interfacing for the collar, and I think that's it. I forgot to cut my sleeves, so they're at the end here. The lining as well. And the little belt thingy for the pants. They are double. After some months and the whole other costume, I returned to the hakama with an iron. And I ironed those pleats really well before I can start sewing. And then I pinned them in place. Just to keep them in place. It makes things easier. I'm going to start by attaching the front and the back of each leg to each other, right sides together. Make sure to mark which cutout is the side or the between the legs one before you iron the pleats, as they are closer to the side one but fall towards the middle. We start by putting the front and back together, but we don't sew the cutout bits, only the straight parts. Do the same in the middle and only sew the straight part. The cutout bits are the cutout bits, they're not gonna be sewn with the rest. I'll explain when we get there. Now we grab the middle of the legs cutouts from both legs and pin them together to sew. Make sure the seams are on the inside before you start sewing. I've done it wrong too many times to count. And just sew it all as one continuous seam, I guess. It's starting to look like something. And now we sew along the top, pretty close to the top, just to keep those pleats in place so they don't flop about all over the place until we get the belt in place. Now for the actual belt, we start with our double panels and we basically sew along the sides and the top, right sides together, and we leave about a centimeter to about a centimeter and a half for seam allowance at the bottom that we don't sew. Once we're done, we need to flip them over and attach them to the top of the hakama. Make sure you pin it on the right place. I start by sewing on the inside so you can see an ugly seam on the outside. My inside is currently the outside, so just to avoid confusion, I didn't flip them over yet, just the belt. Then to do the other side, we need to flip the seams inside and flip about a centimeter into the seam, what is going to be the seam, to hide it, I guess. I pinned that along the whole length of the belt, making sure to always leave about a centimeter inside so it doesn't come undone, and then just sew along that on both sides, the front and the back. And now we can place in the elastic. I used a very thick elastic, it's 7 centimeters wide, I think, but you can use smaller or bigger, I guess. I pinned it in the two ends of the belt because it's elastic, so I'm gonna stretch it while I sew so it does its job. I leave about 2 centimeters of space for the sides, 2 on each side, like we did for making the actual belt, because we need some space in the sides, I guess. And if we sew all along the elastic, there will be no space, because the elastic won't leave any space, or at least it will try not to. I ironed them all again at the end, just to make sure everything's good, and then we add in the pockets, because Ulquiorra does have pockets. He sticks his hand in them all the time. We cut these little baggies a lot bigger than our hands, and we sew them around the little openings on the sides, leaving the top open for the sword to go through. You can leave it only on one side and close all the way around on the other. We start the jacket by putting some interfacing on the collar. None of my fabrics really has a right side, so I just put them together as such. First we have the lining of the back, then we have the outside layer of the back, then the outside layer of the front, the 2 pieces, and then the lining of the front. We pin them together on the sides and the shoulders, and we just sew it as one piece. Now for the collar, we just sew around the sides and the top, then flip it over and attach it to the actual jacket. But before that, we need to put in the zipper. Mine was a bit too big, so I had to move the little metal thingies a bit further down so I could use one I already had. Now this is not the correct way to put in a zipper. This is the lazy way, where I made the fold beforehand and just pin the zipper in place and go straight in with the zipper foot. This is not the correct way. This is the lazy way, but I was in a bit of a hurry. In a hurry, you ask? Well, I'm hoping to be back into the void by the time the Christmas madness begins. I don't want to be around for that. I'm clearly a Halloween person. And now with our lazy zipper in place, we can actually put in the collar. I mark the middle to know where to pin it, and sew along the inside first and then the outside. Again, so we don't have that ugly seam visible. Like in the belt, we flip in the seam from the other side and about a centimeter that we're gonna pin and then sew. Now for the black trim around the edges of the jacket, I use the satin tape, but you can use any kind of black bias tape. This is just what I had. So I have to finish every end with a lighter, so it doesn't come undone. We need to have these black details all around the jacket. I may have cheated a little bit around the corners, but it looks fine, so, you know, no one will ever know unless I tell them. Well, now you know. So, shh. And this is around the time I remember I didn't put the sleeves in the video yet, so yeah, I'm gonna just do that now. I pinned them together outside layer and the lining, and sewed around the whole thing so I can use them as one. You know the drill by now. Then we pin the sleeves to the outside of the jacket. As usual, it's right sides together. We pin from the shoulder to the underside, and we sew from the underside to the shoulder, one side at a time. It's easier that way. And flip it over, try it on, mark where the sleeve needs to end, and I flipped mine inside and gave it an actual hem. But there's no real point in doing that because it's gonna have the black tape around it, so you can do it or not do it, whatever. And then close the sleeve. Now we can actually put the tape around the sleeve as well, same as with the rest. And as usual, I forgot the collar. The collar has the tape around it too. For the wig, I started with a short black base wig. I added some wefts to it that I took from another wig. Some of them I sewed on, some of them I glued on, and yeah, basically that's it. Then I just spiked it up. Ulquiorra's hair is pretty simple. There's really not much to say about it. Use the helmet to check and see where I could spare some wefts and work. I just kept on adding stuff where needed and cutting and spiking. And once we're happy with it, we can steam it, give it some hairspray, and it's done. Looking good. I started the helmet by making a pattern of my head on my improvised mannequin head, so it's the exact size of my head, and then made a prototype with a styrofoam horn, which is the same one I used for the final one. The main part of the helmet is 5mm EVA foam, and the rest is 2mm just because it's cheaper. And this is a prototype. And then I'm gonna use it to make the patterns for the actual helmet that's gonna be entirely 5mm EVA foam. I just used contact cement to attach the little seams it has to fit the head. Then I heat shaped the top of the head thing, I don't know what to call it, so I can glue it on as well. All foam parts are contact glue, only the styrofoam horn has to be with something else, because that would just eat through the styrofoam. Most glues do. I marked the placement of all the pieces, so it's easier to make sure they're in the right place and they all fit where they should, and that there is no glue where there shouldn't be any. That top bit is a bit longer than the main part of the helmet, so we're gonna mark where it ends and also glue that in place in the extra layers at the bottom. I don't know what to call them, before we add in some extra bits for the raised areas to give it some more volume, because the paint alone wasn't gonna do it, I think. After we let it fully dry, we dremeled it to make it a little bit smoother and rounder and make it look more like bone. Then we heat sealed the whole thing to make it nice and smooth, because we can do that after we put on the horn, which I did with hot glue. And we put in the magnets in the little holes that I made with the soldering iron. And then I fixed up the area around the horn with some filler. I don't know what that is exactly. It's a filler. For what? I don't know. And then we finally primed it with white glue as usual. We dab it on because we don't want brush strokes. Takes a bit longer to do, but it dries a bit faster and smoother, a lot smoother. Finally we sew the magnets into the wave, and that's it for the helmet for now. For the shoes, I started by taking a pattern of my foot with duct tape. I drew what I needed on the duct tape before I cut it off my foot. Before I cut it off my foot and cut it apart to make an actual paper pattern that I can use to cut the foam and make a shoe cover. I said duct tape, but I actually meant painter's tape, because it's a lot easier to draw on. Then we take some 5mm EVA foam, because the 2mm one would just fall apart in time. And we cut the shoe on there. The middle front bit is gonna need to be at an angle so they fit together a little bit more round, and the rest is pretty much just all straight. I used hot glue because this is the prototype and I'm in a hurry. And besides, it's gonna have a whole thing over it, and I'm gonna reinforce it on the inside too, because I made my cut a bit too angled. And then we make the details with 2mm EVA foam that I'm also gonna hot glue on. This is a prototype I'm making right now, so it doesn't really matter if there's any loose glue hanging around. For the final one I'm gonna use contact glue because it's a lot cleaner. And it also doesn't come off when you heat it. Here I'm only really just seeing how it looks, where things need to go, if it needs to be bigger, smaller, you know. Did some heat shaping before I put in the little details that go across the shoe. I also put in some elastics and some stuff to close the shoe, basically. That I didn't really record, but I did record it when I make the final one, so, well, I'll show you then. This is the prototype on my foot. It was okay, but the details are a bit too big, or wide, I guess. So now let's make the final one, or two. Here you can see that I put in two different elastics, one for the front part and one for the back. I have some extra little bits of elastic that are for the closings. And now let's make the proper final shoes with everything in the proper colors. You'll need two different sizes of elastic, very thin one and a very wide one. Some weight to close it, some 2mm EVA foam for the details, and 5mm EVA foam for the actual shoe covers. always keeping the blade sharp. We cut straight along most of it, and a slightly less wide angle in the front this time. We used contact cement or contact glue for the shoes, for the final shoes, for everything including the details, and even the closings, except the ones that have elastic. The elastics stick better to hot glue for some reason, so I used hot glue. And they're on the inside, so no one's gonna see them, even if I mess up. This time the pieces fit together pretty well, so I didn't need to reinforce the inside and went straight to the details. I made them slightly smaller than I did in the prototype, because it just felt right and looked more like the reference. Finally, for the closings, I decided to use a 2mm EVA foam to attach the side that's just gonna be there and elastic for the other one, because it just sticks better to foam than the elastic does, and to save elastic basically. 2mm EVA is a tiny bit cheaper and I can still sew the closings to it. So that's what I did. I sewed all the closings to the EVA bits and to the elastics, and then glued them in place with contact cement for the EVA and with hot glue for the elastic. Once that's all done, I took some old shoes and wrapped them in cellophane so I can use them for the heat shaping and heat sealing too. We can do that now, before priming it with white glue as usual, in the same dabbing motion that makes it look smooth. We're done, for now. Made an actual prototype for the katana, but I did make one other katana before, so I just used that to make the patterns. Not the best option, but that's the one I've made. I cut and flattened some PVC pipes for the structure of the sword. I cut the handle, the guard, and the details beforehand. Most of them are 5mm EVA except for the details on the guard of the sword. The blade of the sword is cut at an angle and on one side and straight on the other, because that's the shape of a sword. I don't think I need to explain that. I also cut the sheath twice because I made it this small twice, and then I used the failed attempts to make a successful third one. Ichiko's sword does not have a sheath at all, so I've never made one before. That's the only katana I've ever made. I marked the placement of the pipe in the middle so I can make a little channel using the Dremel, because katanas are very thin swords, so I'm gonna have to stick it into the foam a little bit. I also cut the parts that I'm gonna glue together a little bit so they stick together a little bit better. The glue sticks to it a little bit better if it's a bit rougher. I used contact glue for everything here again, except for attaching the handle to the sword. But first we Dremel. We need to make this sword proper, well, sharp. And also we need to round out the sheath 2 times. I only did that part twice. I am not a complete idiot. Then we heat sealed, fixed it up a bit, put the details on the guard, and finally used some hot glue to attach the handle to the actual, blade. I didn't have enough 2mm EVA for the details on both sides, so I kind of used the soldering iron on the underside because it's not gonna be very visible. Then I just fixed up the part where they connect to each other so it looks nice and smooth and like it's all one piece. And then primed with white glue as usual, like all the other pieces. And here is the successful sheath. I ended up making it kind of like a box. I made sure the blade could fit inside it first, before I put in the final piece, and after, and before I started dremeling and all that. And then I primed it like I did everything else. Back to the helmet again to start painting. I saw a tutorial the other day for miniature skeletons and I wanted to try it out, so I started with a very shiny brown paint that I used to cover all of the helmet, like even in all those little crevices in between the layers of the helmet. All of it needs to be very brown before we can start with the white. For the white I used a very soft brush and I spread the white basically as far as it physically could go. I wanted it to be very lightly white and I didn't want it to go into any of the little crevices. So I basically brushed it on very lightly and the paint was very what's the opposite of diluted? Whatever that is. There was very little water in it, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And I just pretty much spread the white as far as it would go all over the helmet. It took a couple of layers, but it did do the effect I wanted. So I guess that works. A few layers after, but it does. Then I used a sponge brush to layer the very, very white on top of the bony white that I used for the first few layers. This one is really only on the more raised areas because I kind of want to keep the shadows where they are, mostly. So I just don't touch them as much. looks a tiny bit too old, so I still gave it another coat of white. This time with a regular old brush, but I more or less dry brushed it. As you can see, it still has some shadow effects, which is cool because it's gonna need less weathering. We just give it a nice coat of shiny varnish and it's more or less done. I'll give it a tiny bit of weathering later, but it's mostly done. The shoes are probably the easiest part to paint. They're just black and white, and they already are black and white, so I'm basically just reinforcing that with a slightly shinier black and white. I just gave it like 2 coats maybe, just to make sure it was nice and even and shiny. First just the black, and once it was dry I put some painter's tape around the white bits and gave it a nice coat of silver to cover up any leftover markings from the construction and any bits of black paint that may have strayed a bit too far before we gave it a nice coat of shiny white. That's about it for this. I just left this bit in because I think it's satisfying to watch. And then we give it the nice little shiny varnish that we gave to the helmet. And they're all done. Then we start by giving the whole sword a good coat of black because it's gonna make the silver look a lot shinier. Then we take a soft brush and we softly brush some silver into the black. The first few layers will be pretty much all over the sword because the handle is white, but it's a shiny white, so that's gonna need some silver as well. We gave everything a couple of layers of silver because we don't want it to be too light. Then we masked off the guard and the top of the handle so we can do the white. That's gonna be applied like the white glue in a dabbing motion because I want to keep the weird texture I tried very hard to do on it that you can just barely see. Then I also used some silver on the scabbard or sheath because it's black and white and I need it to be green. So to cover up the difference in color, I gave it like 2 or 3 layers of silver first, then one of white, before finally painting it green. And a good 3 to 5 layers of green later, it starts to look like something. It still doesn't look perfect, so I might give it a few more in the future, but for now that'll do. I did the first few layers just brushing it normally, but then the last one I dabbed it on to make it look smooth for the nicer finish it gives and to cover up the very messy sides. Then a good old coat of the shiny varnish and it's done. I followed the tutorial that I can link to below to do this. I hot glued everything in place so it wouldn't move around while I'm working because I've never done this before. I am also using what is basically a vies tape for this because it's the only thing I have in the proper color, and I don't feel like, well, going out and buying cord in the right color. We basically just divide it in two. We glue the middle to the end of the sword and we start twisting. We twist twice before gluing it to the other side, and then repeat the same thing for the other side, and we do that all along the handle. I'm not very good at explaining things, but I think that's pretty much what it is. Then I try to do something close to a traditional way to tie it, well, the end of it. It was also from the same tutorial. I don't think I can explain how I did that. There was a lot of going left and right and under this and under that, and it's confusing. You need a professional for that. Then I finally just cut the cord very short so I can hot glue it under the final layer in a way that it's not very noticeable, and remove the tape. It messed up a bit, but that's okay. We'll fix it. Finally, the weathering. For the helmet, it's pretty simple. I just dry brush some white over the shiny and leave it like that. I do the white only on the raised areas this time. You can't really see much of an effect on the camera, I don't think, but in person you can tell. It's there. It's white, so you know. Do the weathering of the sword. I started by painting the top part with a much darker silver. Also, I did the same for the little details of the guard, and then gave the blade's edge a very bright and very shiny silver, and the final coat of shiny varnish. Honestly, this costume has no right being this comfortable. But whatever. I've practiced this a bit and they are now doing this very smoothly. Took a while, but you know. 3 attempts later, we have a working sheep. Oops. It off. And a pretty cool looking sword. Did I do that? Yeah, I'm doing that wrong. That's why it's not going. So, I guess I'll see you for the next one.